Well,
absolute
look, it's
skill.
great to meet you. I've been probably your biggest fan on Amy. I think this experience turned out beyond expectations. It's truly an excellent journey.
Wow, I'm really flattered to hear that. I mean, I've been making mine in a vacuum. I've had to listen to some of the other ones that showed up on the test pilot app, and I was very impressed by everyone else's. But it's quite difficult to creatively balance yourself off something else. I mean, obviously, I'm going to like it more because I couldn't make it. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to be more into sort of, because it's representative of what my tastes are. But it's really nice to hear that it's being appreciated, and yeah, I'm quite shocked. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, look, I think one of the goals that we have is we're really here to empower artists, and the process that you're going through right now with our team is a very intimate one, where we're helping both on the music side of it and also on the technical part of integrating your musical ideas into the Amy framework. I mean, our goal is ultimately to put those tools in your hands so that you can be essentially a computational artist, to turn your musical ideas, partner with Amy and the AI and on all the technology that we provide you to create these musical journeys on your own. I think one of the things that worked out really well is the partnership that you had with Sam
Very much so.
in building this out. I mean, it sounds like you guys really clicked on the musical side, and he really understood your vision, so he was able to articulate that into the technical implementation side.
He's incredibly patient, which I think I need more than anything else, because I don't know. I don't think I picked it up straight away, but that was more to do with headspace than any kind of difficulty with figuring it out, because I was traveling quite a bit, etc. But yeah, just the time that Sam took on that was fantastic. I really do feel like he's been the co-author of my experience, to be totally honest. Not to give him more credit than he deserves, because he really does deserve that, because it wouldn't have been possible without his sort of feedback. But I think that was more. A lot of that was to do with sort of, rather than me taking the time to really understand the instructions, was taking the time to just ask Sam, which was really, really sped up the process from my point of view, and just getting that sort of in that feedback loop straight away of getting a very quick, very concise and very accurate answer to everything I've done was just invaluable. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, the other thing that I think was really helpful was the flexibility as well, because I was given a pack which gave a suggested way, and I can see the logic of the way that it was suggested to do so, which was that, to aim over 10 different essentially sets as a way of coming through. But that's not really how I work. And I've just came off the back of writing a symphony for the first time in my life. So the thought of doing it as one overarching piece was a bit more appealing. And bless Sam, he bent over backwards to say, well, if you're going to do it that way, which is different, this is the way you need to approach it. Which was incredible. I mean, my manager even said, Dean, he said, I think it's one of the few times I'm going to commend you for not doing what you were told. It is a little bit of a stock and trade sort of response from me. But I think if there is anything that you do relate to in that, I think a lot of that's to do with how accommodating Sam was in allowing me to do it as one overarching piece, rather than sort of 10 disparate pieces, just because that's not how my brain works necessarily. So I don't think that you would have got the best out of me if I had to channel myself to match Amy. So the fact that Amy could match me is, it's a testament to how robust it is as an AI, I guess.
Yeah. Tell me, just backing up a bit, when you were first approached by either Max or Will Saul, I think probably reached out to you.
Will Saul, yeah.
So I'm curious what your initial sort of reaction was when they approached you, and how you sort of framed this in your mind.
It was instant revulsion. I was just like, what? I'm going to get it, because I have this thing that I feel that, for instance, it terrifies me whenever I use Spotify, which I do use a lot. I'm not one of those people who is making a stand against it. I think it's what's happening. But what terrifies me when I use Spotify, and when it comes up with music choices that are better than the ones I would have went for my own tastes, and how easily an algorithm can sort of work me out. And the reason it terrified me is because I felt that was my value to the universe is as a music selector. So if I start training an algorithm for Spotify, it's basically like the Jedi apprentice that murders you in your sleep. Do you know what I mean? Because it sort of removes the need for me to exist anymore. So I had this kind of slight technophobe element to it. And it's Dean, my manager, is a good friend of Will Saul's. So him and Will have been chatting. Dean sort of gave me the loose pitch, and I was like, two thoughts. One, I'm not sure if this is the direction I feel comfortable with music going, just as an instant reaction. But two, I'd like to be part of the conversation all the same. So let's have a chat with these guys and just see what they've got to say. And then the meeting was with Sam. And what's your colleague called, Sam? I'm terribly sorry, I can't remember him right now. But
James
Host. That's right. So the meeting was with Sam and James, and it won me round because I actually hearing first of all the enthusiasm of the people behind it. I didn't feel like I was in the hands of some sort of clinicians, if you get what I mean, who are just looking to monetize things. There's a definite love of music involved in that, which is always a good jumping off point. Second of all, people were really lovely, and I'm a sucker for flattery, so that really helps. But mainly it was, I could see two things there. I could see that what really appealed to me was the thought that if I ever wanted to play live, it would be like having a band of me to jam with, which I know sounds incredibly self-centered when I say it out loud. But as somebody who makes music on their own and sort of wants the feel of what I do, I really like the thought that at some point I could see further down the line, there would be some form of practical application for this, where it could be extending or cloning myself without it being rote behavior, but my learned behaviors instead. And that was quite exciting to us. And I felt that was sort of the practical application that we could put into it that would take it further than just being what, could be easily palmed off as a novelty otherwise, if you don't look into the sort of the depth of where these things can go. And the other thing was, as I say, I can see that if that technology is out there and if somebody is building that, then I would rather be part of what steers it and which way it goes, and sort of, ensure that I've had some part of that conversation into it being a positive application, than sit back, be a Luddite, do you know what I mean? Like throwing my shoes into the machine or whatever else, and then not be able to complain at whatever it turns out being when I've disregarded it, So yeah, I was really one round from that type of thing. But I have to be honest, like initially, and I think it's hammered into us because of a lot of things have sort of changed in the last, especially exponentially in the last decade with how music's done. So the instant thing is like, well, this is going to make it worse, and that's going to make it worse, Sort of like a fear of social media has sort of been driving things in a direction that I'm not necessarily always happy with. And, it's been skewed. But this actually, when it was described to me, I was like, oh, hell, it's quite a nice thing for a change instead. You know what I mean? So yeah, that was pretty much my initial engagement. And as I say, as the more I've worked with your team, the nicer the sort of experiences become for me personally as somebody making something.
Terrific. That's great. I mean, one of the original premises in the company, and I think that ethos has been something that we've stuck to really well, is that everyone is a musician in the company. I'm probably the least formally musically trained people. And part of our goal here too is we're starting with musicians like yourself who have a sound foundation in music theory, in composition, in audio engineering, and that's a lot. The bar is pretty high to be able to achieve the level of musical and technical prowess that you have. We want to take a lot of that science and engineering out of it so that musicians who might not have the same strength in composition or music theory or audio engineering can also create something interesting. But it all starts with musicians like you. And our goal is to empower you, not to replace you. So we're not looking for ways to remove your artistic sense. We're looking for ways to remove the barriers to you expressing yourself artistically so that you can have more time on that side and less time on the tedious parts of creating music.
What might interest you when you say that, though, and which would probably be interesting for anybody trying to get ahead about how accessible it is, and not to sort of minimize the help that I have had, but everything that I created and everything I've sent to you from my place, it's been going on with the backdrop of a particularly frenetic activity in my personal life. I have no studio at the moment, and I've been traveling between, with the coronavirus in the background, I've been traveling between the UK and Mexico, and the majority of what you hear was written in a coffee shop, not a studio. And it was just written remotely on a daily basis in a coffee shop without too much thought into it. And yes, I mean, I have I mean, even from music theory, from some point of view, for anything I ever got taught, I forgot by the time I'd left school. And it's never something I really studied. I'm very much an experimental artist, and I always have been, even with the symphony. You try and work out what the loose framework is. You exist within that, and you experiment, and it's trial and error, and then it comes back. And as long as you work off some premises of just, it's more like problem solving than actual sort of musicianship in a lot of ways. Like all of that was sort of just inherent in the process with the guidelines that were given there. I think it removed the fear factor, shall I say? Like, I think if I was a new person who wasn't confident in myself as somebody who was creative, then maybe I might have been a bit more reluctant to be as experimental as I was. But by and large, what I did there, I think anybody who has an ear for melody and can operate a DAW to the most minimal way will be able to get something satisfying out of this. Definitely. I mean, what came out of this was, I came in with a few premises of what I thought would work over sort of the understanding I have of how the system works. But for the most part, it's just advice that you need to provide this, and this in this way. I followed that. I did it for what was pleasing to me. And this is what came out of it. So I think if anybody does approach this from a point of view of following the guidelines and creating something that's pleasing to them, they will get an experience out of this that they would be happy with.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you just captured in a nutshell our goal, which is to make it easier to do exactly what you did. So
I think you're possibly closer than you think you are. That's all.
That's great. So Sam, I mean, walk us through. You're formally trained both in electronic music composition and also in music theory, and you've got a lot of your own sort of artistic styles. I'm always fascinated by when you have to kind of put your ego and your own sense of art aside and really work closely with another artist. Talk about that process, because this is ultimately the manpower experience, not the Sam experience. What's that like, putting aside your artistic ego and allowing yourself to really work closely with another artist?
I mean, I've always loved sort of amplifying other artists' signals. I've, been on the back end of production for other people's work a number of times, and sort of starting with references, listening to their music and sort of trying to put yourself in their shoes. All I'm doing is, plugging in what they've put together already and getting it to be packaged in a way that's going to be similar to how they move through ideas, their energy flow, as best as I can using the technology that we have. And sort of with the point about theory that was brought up before, I really like that Jeff initially wanted to go for, writing all of the ideas in a single project and a single mindset, because while we have this 10 bite-sized chunk suggestion, this is because, it often is easier creatively to tackle. But for someone that doesn't have as much understanding of theory and just has a good ear, it's really helpful to see all of these ideas contextually together and be like, do these all work together? Which is really more of a matter of if your ear can identify that or not, theory aside. But because we've done stuff like this, it actually really allowed for my creativity to shine more, where I can work with all of his ideas and they already all work together, which gives me a ton of options for how to phrase things, how to layer them. For instance, the bass lines that Jeff gave me, it was 2 different layers, and all of them worked together over all of each other. So some of the stuff that I had done to implement sort of variations of that was only possible because of the workflow that he went through to get there. And as always, artists that are more comfortable with this as a collaboration end up getting more of their original sound sort of out of the end product, which is sort of ironic, because you'd think, if they don't look at it like that, it's going to be, more their sound. But in reality, working with new technology, it requires you to sort of be open to the process. And I feel like our workflow back and forth has been more collaborative than anyone else that I've worked with. And I do think that we were managed to get a lot closer to all of his ideas than any other artist that I've gotten to work with.
Jeff, I was looking at your your bio on Resident Advisor. I'm not sure how up to date that is, but it does it does seem like you've kind of pushed your artistic sensibilities beyond any given genre, and you've explored other styles and genres as well. Um, in terms of things like creating maybe an ambient experience or experiences that get outside this the specific tone and style that you've created for the original Manpower experience, how much has this process with us sort of inspired you to think about other styles and genres that you might be able to create?
What with regards to the actual to Aimi itself,
Yeah,
specifically for Aimi? Well, to be honest, the sky's the limit. I mean, the first one, there was a lot of back and forwards, but only from a kind of, it's like being taught how to drive to a degree. And what was really nice was, so it was really nice to be able to do something that I feel could work over a variation of tempos that had a sort of, set feel that doesn't tire. And that for me, I'm a massive fan of people like Steve Reich, Philip Glass, etc. And I find it very sort of inspiring that kind of the sort of beauty and minimalism and how long you can how long you can swell something and how long you can go out. So it just really feels like the sky's the limit now. So it's just like I want another turn, and it's like, yeah, it's very easy now. I know what I can do with it. It's very easy to kind of explore that. And to be honest, I think my heart definitely lies more in sort of melodies and sort of point and counterpoint and that type of thing. And the thought of doing things where the percussive end of things and the drum programming, etc., having an experiment of seeing how far we can go without those, etc. It there seems to be like quite a lot of different ways of experimenting. And what I do think it finds is it's almost like a proving method for the strength of an idea. This is terrible to say, but I get frustrated to a degree because as a commercial artist, I have to sell music to a certain degree. People have to buy it, and because of that, I've got a tendency to make tracks that are over 10 minutes long. And recently released something that was 30 minutes long. And what I find with that is that for a commercial release, that scares people off. It's obviously even simple things like radio play or even just for club play, it's not instantly appealing as a single that you could buy, should we say.
sure.
And that for me is quite limiting because I really want to see how far and how long an idea can work for, how long you can be responsive to it, sort of, how good the strength of the idea is. There's always this talk about, Daft Punk. If you listen to any Daft Punk song, it's one loop, but the loop's so good that you don't get tired of it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the kernel of what I really like exploring. How good is a concept? How good is sort of the textures and sort of the ideas that you've brought into that, and how long before somebody can tire from it? So I've got to be honest, that this sounds terrible. I haven't tired listening to my own experience yet. I've had to stop it because I've run out of time to listen to it. I'm building.
I agree with you.
And I managed to listen to it for nearly 2 hours on the like over 10 miles. And it worked. And I was really pleased about that because it's new territory. I find myself now in a place where it's been removed, where I have to concern myself with the commercial constraints of sort of, and the physical constraints of format and also the channel. Do you know what I mean? Like the sort of, a beat port, like, because nobody will buy a track that long because they have no practical application for it. But you've now created a kind of, or you're in the process of creating a new channel or a new way where there is actually a practical application for continuous sort of continuous music. And there's not a point, I feel, when I've listened to what I've done, that it sounds like it's not me, and it sounds like it hasn't been imbued with my ideas, even if I'm not the person activating or triggering or whatever else. I don't feel like I'm cheating, shall we say, which was one of the worries, that you do something and it's like, well, actually the platform's doing all of the work, the artificial intelligence is doing all the work. But it's not, it's just, it's playing with you. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I'm very excited about the thoughts of doing a lot of different things on there.
That's great.
Yeah, just for my own ego, just to say, all right, well, so it works with the ambient thing, or yes, I'm capable of doing that, or no, I'm not. Yeah, it's quite a nice, it's quite addictive when you find some new kind of musical outlet, isn't it? It's like learning a new instrument in a way.
Sure. I'll tell you, part of the inspiration for Aimi was listening to performing musicians, like electronic musicians, who capture you for multi-hour sets.
Yeah.
And there's a very unique way that they do that. And it's very different structure than a song. And even if you take a playlist of songs, you still have this sort of confined nature of each song having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in many ways, like I have a hard time listening to playlists because each song is kind of like, designed to hit you hard, and there's no continuity between it. Now you can crossfade and do other tricks like that, but there's no journey. It's really like you're eating a bunch of candy, and after a while you get tired of the candy. So I've had your experience on for hours. In fact, I had it on
Wow.
the other night. I had a dozen people over at my place, and I played a couple experiences, yours and another artist. We had maybe 6 hours of music on, and that was spread across two experiences. Yours played for
Wow. That's so
three and
flattering
a
to hear.
half hours. And there's a beauty to the journey, and it's almost like one of our goals here is to make the music be part of the experience, not be the experience. You're not going to put on Amy and have everyone sing to Manpower, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
Manpower will be infused into your conversation and your party, and the experience itself. And I think your experience worked really well in that context. And one of the things I was talking to Sam with before you jumped on the call is like, why did this one succeed so well? And I think it was a combination of things. One, your theme, the way you sort of organize your musical ideas were very coherent. There was a story already before you handed it over to Amy to
Yeah,
try to
that was
essentially take
important to
you
me.
on a
Yeah.
journey through that. The other part of this too is, we're going to show you Amy Studio. We're going to pull
Oh,
back the
wow.
curtains and give you a kind of a peek into that. So the reason we haven't released Amy Studio yet is we've wanted to work closely with artists to understand exactly how they think about expressing themselves, and then making sure that Amy Studio was a tool to empower them to express themselves, as opposed to something that's going to make them feel confined. So what you're going to see, Sam, you can go ahead and pop it up. So what you're going to see right now is Amy Studio, and the important thing to understand about it is we kind of view the experience as this multidimensional musical space,
Right.
and you as the artist, or in partnership with us, will be able to sort of craft this multidimensional space. And there's all kinds of different things that you can configure.
Hold on,
There's
let me.
there's various different sections that you can create. There's various different ways of going from one section to the other.
Hmm.
There's different groups of loops or themes that you can include in those different sections. So all of that stuff is configurable, but it's still confined within the construct that we've created today.
Hmm.
What we're going to be releasing very soon is a way for you to essentially create an arbitrary number of sections. So you can effectively script any kind of masterpiece that you want. And then Amy will essentially be the storyteller, but you're going to give it the words for any one of these different sections. And it'll take the user on this endless journey through your musical genius. And it'll be your words. It'll just be Amy telling the story. So that's our
Yeah,
goal
yeah.
with this.
Cool. So right here, I've loaded up your experience.
Uh-huh.
We have some mixed at the top. And then we have our mix parameters where we have access to all 7 groups that I've split your music up into. And reverb for these channels that really just are there to help soften some of the
Yeah,
weak
of course.
points, depending. Um, in our global composition settings, this sort of sets the general pace of the experience, how often we switch between different combinations of ideas, how often we play individual loops, how long those loops play for. Um, we have these riser effects, subsection probabilities. These are a number of sort of arrangement tricks that we've built into Amy that do different things. I know the numbers aren't very verbose, but we sort of have note sheets for this stuff right now, and these are sort of changing as we go. But for build-ups and breakdowns, filtering out ideas, we've sort of built some of these in here, and we're currently working on new features to allow us to access a lot more different ways to move through loops using
Mhm.
the available effects and filters. So I can activate, I can have some of these play more often than not, or not at all, and this is sort of just going to be dependent on what works with your content, and
Yeah, yeah.
also what I hear from your music. We have a harmony priority, which is basically determining what elements dictate what should be played melodically. And so sort of one is selected first and then others are pitched to match. Though in your experience, it's not as important because you've written everything
The
with
same
each
place.
other.
Mhm.
We don't really have to pitch stuff nearly as much. And though some pitching is done sort of just to shake things up, in general,
Yeah, I've
this
noticed
becomes
that. There's
more
a
important.
transpose section that comes in every now and again, which I can see why that would be incredibly useful for the other ones that have been done, perhaps not all as one project. So that was something that, again, when you talk things to look forward to, it's sort of, well, now that I know that's in there, start thinking with that in mind as well. Because I can see where it really does add a nice shift in making it sort of, that you can listen to for longer because of that change. It's almost like an element of relief. But I think that I could probably play towards that rather than ignore it like I did the first time around.
Absolutely. The total number of combinations you can find once you open up the door for, shifting things a fifth or whatever, really allows for a much longer playback experience. But of course, it's really nice to be able to confine that for when you want it to happen and with what loops. And so, these are all things that we're building up. We have our section length override stuff, which is basically just for me to take different sections, like for instance, your breakdown where all of the drums leave, and have that be a shorter section than maybe one of these longer ones that's more full and has a lot more melodic content going.
It makes a lot of sense.
These have been very helpful to sort of allow each section to live for the length that it should. And here we sort of have a section or our module where we select which groups are playing when. And these names are kind of placeholders. You could take them for what they are, but in general, it's basically like 7 different sections where I'm deciding which of these elements are playing, and it's mostly trying to highlight various combinations of content and swapping between them and allowing different ones to shine. We have access to slow fading, which allows groups to crossfade, slowly fade in when they haven't been playing. And we have a transition matrix here, which is basically saying, if I'm currently in an intro, how often am I going to jump to this section versus how often could I jump to this one? So there's a bit of a stochastic nature to this where sometimes we go to this, sometimes we go to that. But you do have control over how often those things are, which is helpful when you're trying to make something more specific. Like for instance, the breakdown section where there isn't drums, that's somewhere where you might want to map that out more specifically than other sections that are more comfortable going anywhere.
Sam,
so we typically,
you want to go ahead and kick off some music? Let's listen and
see how this is going.
So Jeff, one of the things that we're adding is the ability for you to create your own sections and arbitrary numbers of them with basically small scripts that trigger various different effects. So you'll be able to create those just like we've created these. The ones that we've created apply to a broad range of musical styles, but we recognize that what artists are going to want is even more intimate control of how this gets expressed. Jeff, you want to tell us about the origins of the Manpower name?
About the name, it's a strange one actually, because I've got a. I guess everybody ends up regretting what they call themselves eventually, don't they? It all started out. So I used to work on in a couple of different projects. So we were gigging, and it was working with other friends as a sort of collaborative music releases over a decade ago. And I'm fairly prolific, and back then I was even more prolific. And I found it marginally frustrating to be working at the same pace as the people I was working with, and wanted to do things on my own. But what I realized was that, from a very practical concern, first of all, if I made music that was too similar to what I was making with two friends, then I'd be causing people to make a kind of binary decision between my solo work and the work that we did together. And beyond that, the other thing I was very aware of was if they were comparable and people looked at it and they were looking at gigs, well, there was 3 of us in one outfit, which is 3 flights and 3 hotels, and the other one's 1 flight and 1 hotel. So I'd almost be kind of, just by my proliferation of how much music I can make, I'd almost be taking my friends out of the equation. So what I decided to do was I focused on one element of the music I was making, and I also decided to do it incognito and sort of, So that, and just completely strike out from a completely different circle of influence, etc. There we are. So nice. The first tracks that I did had a real heavy kind of late 70s electro disco, early 80s feel, and it really reminded me of people like Patrick Cowley, who had the Menergy project, and also things like sort of Man Parish and all of that kind of very sort of just very much of that era and from that kind of space. So I just named the project, as in the folder that I used for it, I just named Manpower, because I thought Manpower was like Man Parish, and it was just quite a funny kind of like, you know, it made me laugh, and I thought that would be a great name for somebody without thinking too much. And then I really liked the idea of being non-explicit about identity as well, because I like the thought of removing any context from the music that you'd hear. So I completely kept the identity separate, and I posted a lot of sort of sexually ambiguous imagery, etc., which could be taken on very many different levels, if you get what I mean, about sort of identity, etc. And it was just a bit of a joke, and it's typically the bit where you're making a joke is the bit that you get known for, isn't it? You know, the only thing that would have guaranteed that another project would have done better is if I came up with an even more problematic name for it, I think. But I can certainly say that it's certainly not it's not a misogynist term. It's far from it. It's exactly the opposite. But I have considered over the years that perhaps it might have done me better because, you know, over the last decade, I think it has got more on a glance, possibly a bit more problematic, and hopefully not. Hopefully everybody can see, well, you know, it's not very difficult to actually read anything that I've had to say about life, do you know what I mean, online. So you can kind of get the impression that it's not the statement I'm making, but it just does go to show that whenever you're kind of doing things that you think that'll do for now, you know, that'll do until I think something better, I can guarantee you that's what you're going to end up. That is literally the way that it goes, you know.
It's like getting a nickname as a child. If you fight it, it
exactly
sticks.
exactly that. Or giving your Wi-Fi a stupid offensive name, well, you can't think of anything else. Do you know what I mean? So you give it a really vulgar, sexual, or swearing name, and then the little old woman from next door is logged onto it for the next 10 years, and she has to tell all her neighbours that, you know, that. Lesson learned with that one. I think I'll focus group any name I need to use in the future for any possible sort of new projects.
Well, let's have a listen. I'm
definitely
eager to get your thoughts as we listen. I love this.
Thanks.
This is terrific.
So I can pull this up and we can sort of look at which groups are being activated.
Yeah.
This is kind of like your MIDI overlaid on top of each other. So you're looking at one octave essentially. What was that?
Even though it's just the bass and not the melody playing, it has a very melodic sense to it. I like it.
So the idea was that I decided what would work the best with the limited knowledge I had of it was to break everything up so that any two elements you can bring at any point using and both the same type of story. And then the only thing that changes is a lot of them would play the same melody. The only thing that gradually built emotional sort of content, which is what came with sort of the pedal bits and particularly with the strings that we added right at the end. But it wasn't until I was confident that the skeleton, if you like, was in there and was pleasing enough and that could last, that I wanted to put some sort of emotional flesh on it after that.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the things I think that works really well here is that the rhythm doesn't wear you out, you know, and it's because it has a lot of texture to it. It's not just a hard driving drum that's beating you up. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why you can play this for 3-4 hours and it keeps pulling you in, is because the rhythmic elements have a texture to them that I think makes it accessible. And then when you get some of the harmonic elements and the melodic elements layering in on top of that, it's almost like joyful, you know, like it's like,
well, it's like a relief. And the other good thing is that the drums are very, very simple. And I know we discussed this, and you'd suggested at one point maybe I should have. Well, you didn't suggest. You asked me if I wanted to add more drums to it, but the idea is that the rhythmic framework isn't just contained in the drums, but it's actually contained in the bass and the melodies and the counter melodies, etc. So they almost act like drums with, you know, or as a percussive force. So that, because there's a lot of points, and you picked up on this really well, Sam, that you were removing the drums from playback, I think possibly a bit more than maybe they are in other experiences. But that's great that you picked up on that, because that is very much sort of designed into that, and the thought that sort of, you know, that you don't need to hear those drums to feel that groove and that melody, and that they're I think in a lot of electronic music, drums are everything, and the rest is just sort of window dressing. And I prefer not to make music from that point of view. I prefer them to be on sort of an equal standing to everything else as well. And like I say, you picked up on that great in this.
I think it worked.
Really quick on some of these groups. So the bass has like these 2 layers of bass that Jeff had given me, kind of alternating between a number of different variations. The pads are sort of softer chord progression movements. These are kind of the ones that I'd like to run for longer over more pedal tone melodic ideas. The harmonics are sort of more of these pedal tone ideas that can kind of loop in any section. And we had experimented with having it loop in smaller bits and longer ones. And then the melodies are, as you might expect, like longer melodic phrases. But sort of auctioning between these combinations sort of allowed for the best playback. And the tops and the beats are, of course, drum-related stuff.
So did you spend, I mean, because your responses were always quite fast by the next day, but I guess you must be quite a high level of trial and error for you on this as well, no?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of different artist experiences, but to be honest, I've wanted to work with artists in this capacity where they do have this full project of ideas that are all sort of written together, because it just opens up the door for trying a number of things that, I mean, I've always been interested in trying myself. So while there were a lot of trial and error, especially with the bass and the drums, sort of getting those ideas to work properly and finding ways for the bass to cut and be very simple and just like the subline versus when it has this top layer, and having the beats change at a good cadence and sort of swap at the right moments with the melodic content. This stuff is what studio is really helpful for, to sort of fine tune these bits, figure out kind of the timing of these things. And
ultimately,
Sam,
that's something that you'd be offering the artists to be able to do, I guess, via studio, that they can be the ones to do their own trial and error.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the studio app is really designed to be essentially like your DAW, but focused more on the creation of the experience. So we'll support you being able to pull in your content. We'll classify that content. So we'll extract various elements from it that are implicitly part of the musical elements themselves. So we have a bunch of content classification scripts that run and figure out if something has vocals in it, or if something is melodic or harmonic or rhythmic. We'll help you organize all your content into these different groups. And then the idea there is also to allow you to create as many of these groups as you want and as many sections as you want. And if you want to get into the underlying scripts that create this, you can, but we're going to templatize it for you. So if you don't want to, you have this more sort of high level interface that you can jump into.
Yeah.
So it's really, we really feel like the right role for the technology that we're building is to empower you, not to replace you. So we're giving you the ability to let the system do as much as it wants, or as much as you want, or you take full control and you're directing the system.
That makes perfect sense.
So.
And I guess even with anybody, depending on how sort of prevalent the activity is on it, most people you'll find have use for both. At some points, if it's a live performance, it'd be very nice just to go through everything at it and just say, become my random partner. Whereas if you want to create an experience where you want to get quite granular and create something specific that has a particular message that people are going to return to, then it's nice to be able to be the person to get involved and really do your own tweaking, I suppose.
Let's have another listen to maybe what's the Markov model say after build up? A sustain, or what's the next most likely section?
Build up most likely will end up at drop, but there's a number of combos that it might go to.
Okay.
Let me.
So you can see here, Jeff,
sharing?
There's 128 beats in this build up section, and you can control that length too.
Great.
Yeah. is different from each section has a different length.
It's hard to just not groove to this. I mean, it's really good.
I'm not my own head in a row.
So what would you call this, if you're going to give a sort of genre style to this, what would you call this?
No idea. I really try to, where I can, operate either very strictly in genres to the point where it's super obvious, or trying to project. I just say that the thought I had in mind, there's a lot of elements of just, I really like it when bands get together and jam for a great long length of time, so I was just trying to approach everything so there's more to do with sort of like jazz and funk than there is electronic music. There's very much a funk underpinning to go around here.
Sam, could you turn down the volume a touch?
I'm not sure. There isn't a massive volume.
If you turn it down on your Mac, it'll actually turn it down on
Okay. Does that work?
Yeah, that worked great.
Cool. Sorry about that.
So I don't know whether you heard the transition from the build to the drop, but it's,
Yeah.
So now we're in a drop section. This will go on for 256 beats, and then it'll pick another section to move to based on whatever that transition matrix was, right? So, as I said, we have a certain number of sections defined now, but we're going to let you create as many of these as you want.
Yeah.
And you can make this as rich and as complex as you need to, or as simplistic as you want. Like, for example, if you do an ambient experience, you don't probably need a build and a drop. You're more sort of exploring a more sustained type of progression.
Yeah, for the ambient experience I worked on most recently, it had more of a deterministic trajectory, so that like I could be sure just one element gets added in or one element gets added out, because any big change is obviously not really what you're normally looking for in an ambient experience. But I'd say with this experience, there's a lot more options, which increases the chance of variation and is preferred if you can get away with it. Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting to see if I do an ambient thing, just because most of the ambient music I make is one of the better, is very wet, very sort of based. So how that works using multiple sections, I think it's going to be some creative EQing and effects basically. But it's like I'm already saying it's like, oh, that's a nice new challenge. See how I can get that to communicate around it. I don't think it's going to be too challenging. It's just learning a new way of speaking that language, I guess.
Have you heard Serenity on Aimi, the ambient experience that we created?
Yeah, but that was on originally, wasn't it? It was one of the first things that was on there, is that right?
Yeah. So that, initially that was a bit of a challenge because it didn't follow the structure of any other kind of music that we had created. So that's, pushing ourselves to deal with different styles of music has really helped us understand how to get that control and configurability back to the artist.
Well, from a personal point of view, I think that was my favorite experience from the initial crop as well. So it definitely was a success.
So just a quick bit of trivia for you. We're now on average daily listening time is over 3 hours in Aimi.
Really?
Yeah, 3.1 hours, which is a pretty phenomenal statistic because Spotify's...
what was your target?
Yeah, we're shocked, to be honest with you, that it's that high. Spotify's at 2.4 hours, and I think the reason is exactly what you said. Once you hit play, you kind of don't want to turn it off. It's almost addicting.
It's really strange.
Yeah.
It grabs you because there isn't a logical point to turn it off. It has to be an external
That's
thing.
A great point. That's a great point.
It's not like, well, that's the end, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a root cross keeping its own tail thing.
It's almost like when you're at a live set, and you don't want it to end, and then if the DJ has to end, it's like it's almost crushing. When they turn off the music and turn on the lights. So.
That's really impressive. I'm really, I am. I mean, not that I had any doubt that it would be successful, but that's fast as well to get up to that kind of.
Adding
the Pandora's box, it could be exceeding all expectations.
Well, we hope so. Look, we're going to be announcing some changes too in the structure for how we work with artists, and we really believe that our role is to empower artists to monetize their ideas. Mm-hmm. And the more we can create these experiences that pull a listener in and keep you in there, the more I think we're going to let the artist really engage with their fans directly. Your problem and many artists' problems is if you create a 3-minute song and you get slotted into a playlist, you're kind of commoditized, right? Like if I go put on an ambient playlist, I don't remember who the artists are.
Yeah, of
I'm just
course.
listening to ambient music, and they're trying to turn songs into an experience using the playlist. Now you can be the experience, and that's why we use the word experience instead of album or song or track.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really about the manpower experience, and I think that's the stats are proving that out. So
yeah,
far.
I mean, from my own point of view, I've pretty much given up on the standard industry model in general. You know, I participate in it, but solely because that's the only one that's available to me to get musical ideas out there. And it is nice to make individual tracks, etc. And especially as a DJ, you know, to play them and have friends play them.
Right.
That's one of the additional things. But the main reason I do music is to communicate an idea. That's it. You know, you know, I've had a full 18 months of lockdown to kind of look into my my own motivations, and yeah, the biggest thing is I just want to be understood, man, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It genuinely, just, you know, I've got feelings and thoughts, and I want to communicate them to other people. So as soon as you remove the kind of tiresome element of having to be sort of fit into a particular recognizable product that can be sold to somebody in X amount of way, and the amount of selling that I would have to do myself for you know, each sort of kernel of an idea, and give me a format where I can just do the equivalent of speaking at length, which you probably notice I have no problem doing. That's absolutely, so, you know, it's a joy for me, because it removes a whole lot of things that I find borderline unpleasant about, you know, working with my own creativity. So yeah, for me, it's really, yeah, I'm very intrigued to see where this can go and what I can do with it, and see what the rewards are on an intrinsic or a personal level for how people connect with these experiences versus people connect to what, in a very real sense, as much as I'm proud of what I put out there, is still compromised by several different sort of concerns. You know, it's not pure expression. There's always an eye on, well, I have to make it this format, I have to make it this length, I have to make it tolerable for these people, etc. So yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a nice virgin territory at the very least, but you know, it could be just a big playground otherwise.
I love that. That's great. Well, look, we're coming up against an hour here.
Cool.
I wanted to just thank you, Jeff, for trusting us with your art and trusting us with your passion. And I hope we created something that's exemplary of you know, your professionalism. So we're thrilled to be working with you.
I'm very grateful to be involved, and it really helps that you're all really lovely people as well, which makes the experience a lot more pleasant. And yeah, I'm actually, you know, from sort of mild trepidation, which anybody does with something they've never heard before, I've gone from, you know, I'm one of your biggest advocates now. I've really enjoyed the process, and I'm really enjoying the output as well. But more to the point, and I feel like I've had a taste now. Do you know what I mean? It's not so much that, that it's done and I'm moving on to the next thing. I'm looking forward to seeing how this development grows, and it's nice. It's, you know, it's an oft-used phrase, but it's nice being in at the ground floor on these type of things as well. You know, sort of.
Right.
Really
well, we're eager to get these tools in your hands too, so that you can be the maestro. You know, and you know, Sam and the rest of the content team are going to be creating as many of these different templates and sort of high-level abstractions of what these experiences look like.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to start slowly giving you the tools to create those as well, and then you can go nuts and express yourself as sophisticated as you want.
So that might not be that sophisticated from my point of view, but we'll see. Definitely look nice to find out what my level is, if one way or the other. But yeah, no, it's been an absolute joy. I'm really grateful that you wanted to hear what I thought about it as well, and I'm sure this is not to quote Casablanca too directly, but probably the start of a beautiful friendship. You know, I'm happy to keep on working and seeing what else is possible here.
Terrific, great. Sam, thanks for your time today too. I appreciate it. And great job working on this. And I think you can tell from Jeff's feedback that he's really impressed with the work that you've done too. So
I really enjoyed working on it as well. I got to do things that I haven't gotten to do yet with an experience, just by nature of us working collaboratively on this. So I really appreciate you being patient with the process as well.
And vice versa. Same back at you. Yeah, thanks for that, man. That's perfect. Well, I'll let you get on with the rest of your lives, but thanks for taking time. And yeah, no doubt we'll speak again about something very soon, I'm sure.
Likewise. Cheers.
Take
Thanks,
care,
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.